Okay, here we are. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 10. We have 7 participants here this evening, a very quiet one, very quiet. So this week, as you can see on the slide, our focus is on reflecting on pedagogy and pedagogical frameworks. So we unpacked pedagogy in last week's seminar, and now we're looking specifically at frameworks. Okay. All right, so I like to start with a bit of an overview of the Learning Forum, just so you know what to expect. So we're going to be building on your understandings from last week's seminar and the reading that you would have done. We're also going to be further unpacking assessment tasks through, and that's going to be through assessing a worked example. So we're going to do that together. So this is kind of in preparation for giving each other peer feedback, where I'm going to break you into groups of 2, going into your breakout groups, and you'll be able to get some feedback. And finally, the opportunity for some catch-up time for those of you who want to stay on and have a bit of a social time. All right. So for this Learning Forum, you will need, Jen asked you to have these things ready for this session. So you're going to need the assessment task sheet to refer to, of course, with the attached criteria sheet. So that's this one here. That's the one that we're really going to be concentrating on this evening. That it says assessment task 1, but it's actually the assessment task 2 rubric. That threw me last week. And I'd also asked you to bring along a copy of the tag feedback form. So you could have that in the form of a hard copy, or you could have it as a screenshot on your phone. So it's up to you, but as long as you have a copy of those to refer to. And of course, you will also need your draft reflection of your case study 1. It's preferably saved as a Word document, so you can share that in the chat room, in the breakout room, but just the reporting and responding parts. So the first 2 R's, that's what we're going to be unpacking tonight in our breakout groups. So many of you have already sent me emails asking for some feedback with some of your ideas. So that's wonderful. Continue doing that. I'm happy to provide you with some feedback if you have any questions. But in this session, we're actually going to provide each other some feedback, so peer-to-peer feedback. So it will be a nice opportunity. All right, so to get started, we're going to recap on our learning objectives from last week. So week 9, you would have developed these understandings through reading chapter 3 and watching the seminar, and there were also some video clips to engage in. And those video clips are what we're going to concentrate in the next little while. So become familiar with some key pedagogies that shape teachers' practice. So we focused on 4, but as I said in the seminar, there are going to be many more that you're going to come across during your placements and also moving into professional practice. And you're also going to come across more in the other units that you study over the next 3.5 years. Describe different pedagogical approaches that can inform a teacher's practice, and understand the features of these different pedagogies, so the specific approaches and teaching strategies utilised. So Jen wants us to overview and ascertain your understandings of the pedagogies that we've explored so far, ready to move next week into exploring curriculum. So the first slide, the first clip that you were asked to have a look at, Pedagogy Example 1, this was from a kindergarten setting. So from watching this clip and engaging with last week's materials, what do you think was the most prominent pedagogy? reflected in the teacher's approaches. What do you think? Any thoughts there? The most prominent one.
Play-based.
Play-based, yeah, definitely, yeah. What about one from within?
Sharing is
one? Yeah. That was Ashley. Kylie, was it? Who was that?
Ashley. I would have said caring too, but it was very hard to hear it. But yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, I had no trouble hearing it. That's interesting. No, I would definitely have said caring as well. So how is that expressed?
Well, she listened
I
to
think
them.
you'd say that there was a, sorry, Sue, but there was like an evident kind of attention given to each child, and showing of interest and engagement in that child, and then they reciprocated that.
Yeah, definitely. So individual, one-on-one, getting down to the student's level. And as Sue said, definitely actively listening. Sue, did you want to elaborate on that at all?
No, you both said it all now.
Sorry.
No, but in the seminar, I went through, for me, that pedagogy of listening, being an early childhood teacher, that pedagogy of listening is, to me, that's vital. So actively listening to students, even though she was still monitoring what other students were doing, you could see her looking over her shoulder at the rest of her group. Her active listening and the engagement with the children, it was really purposeful. So making eye contact, paraphrasing, and really, it was clear that she was engaged in what each of those children was saying. So definitely a caring pedagogy of listening. I thought that she could have possibly used some more open-ended questions to encourage inquiry. But I guess there is lots of opportunity to extend children's learning and for more development using a critical pedagogy. So if you were to consider next steps or what they might do to follow up on what those children were saying. So you might want to develop, use inquiry-based approaches and sort of more of a critical pedagogy. What about collaboration? Did you see any?
I saw that a bit, Ange. I thought she was getting that first, starting them to work as a team and learn off each other and see what each other has collected, and yeah, getting them to talk to each other in their own little group.
Excellent. Yeah. I noticed the same things, Lauren. She really modelled and encouraged sharing, didn't she? She was really focusing on that. So that's, I guess, it's the basis. It's the beginning of collaboration, isn't it? Those communication skills and the ability to take turns, to share perspectives, to listen to other people. So, modelling that is very important. So I would definitely say there were aspects of collaborative pedagogy there. Anything else that anyone wanted to add? So the second example, which pedagogy do you think was most prominent in this one? Was pretty clear what this one involved.
I've written nature and play space, but I'm not sure if I was watching the right video, but I think I am.
That's right. No, it's different.
Okay.
The screenshot here is different to the one that was on the thing, but you're right.
Okay.
Bingo. You're right, Kylie. Yep, definitely place-based pedagogy. So as you said, that emphasis on nature, so on nature and the community. So I think the comment that was made was maths is evident everywhere. So it was about connecting content and pedagogical practice. So really bringing mathematical concepts and cultural understandings together, a real emphasis on Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. What about a caring pedagogy? Was that evident at all, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And also it allowed the parents to become involved as well, which
Definitely, yep. So the parents were involved. So I guess as well as caring, you've got a collaborative pedagogy there. So the emphasis was on getting to know and understand students, developing those relationships with the community, relationships with the family, seeing students as competent, having natural curiosity, I think was one of the comments that was made. But I think the one that really shone out was the collaborative pedagogy. So they had a family maths day, I think it was. So encouraging families to enter into the space, to engage and to express their understandings and their connections. I think the term was used was building the bridge. So again, that emphasis on those connections between student, between teacher and content that we unpacked in the seminar. So example 3, this was a science teacher, a secondary teacher. What approaches did this teacher outline? We got any secondary pre-service teachers here?
Yeah, I would say definitely he encouraged the collaborative pedagogy, critical pedagogy, possibly.
So how?
Inquiry in society,
Yeah.
and then maybe what's pedagogical content knowledge? I was a bit confused.
Are you talking about explicit instruction?
No, so in there's the table of pedagogical approaches in the book.
Yeah.
And pedagogical content knowledge as a
Yes.
pedagogical approach. Is that just focusing on that knowledge?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess explicit instruction. So from teacher modelling, the I do, we do, you do. So really encouraging that hands-on approach that he was talking about, and then scaffolding with theory, with an emphasis of bringing the content into the school. So yeah, but I think it was relating structure to function. I think, what did they do? They had excursions. What else did they do to do that, bringing the context into the school? The context into the school. Can you remember what there was? The word.
They brought in scientists, and then they also brought in specialists of that subject. Yeah. That's
right. Yeah, yeah. And I also.
Which is another layer of collaboration.
Excellent. Very good, Paris. Excellent. Yeah, definitely another layer of collaboration. So they were dressing up as surgeons as well, and dissecting the heart. So the teacher's emphasis was very much on developing that more complex understanding. So as you said, that critical learning as well. So the emphasis again on inquiry learning, with the teacher posing those really in-depth questions to stimulate critical reflection. So, we're up to example 3, and we've seen so many different ways, different approaches to teaching and learning. So the 4th one, the final one, this was a really interesting one. I loved this, tinkering school. So what approaches were evident here? What pedagogical approaches? It's a great image too.
I thought the caring and the critical pedagogy, because he was talking about, giving children the time to actually work through the task. And then, so I think that sort of relates to both, because it allows the children to, I guess, lead their learning and to think about what they're doing. And I suppose makes them feel, empowered with what they're learning as well, like being quite hands-on.
Oh, excellent, Ashley. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that giving them time, which is something that in school generally we seem to lack. We're always rushing, trying to get everything done that we need to do, tick all the curriculum boxes. But I guess the emphasis here was on really allowing students the time and also the opportunity to explore a range of materials and also tools as well, building hands-on projects, lots of freedom as well. That seemed to be a big emphasis from what I heard. And teachers seen as collaborators. I liked that. So collaborators, not so much as facilitators, but actually collaborating. So I guess as well as seeing students as being capable and competent in using the tools and constructing, they would also need to be competent in terms of being able to collaborate in groups. So working as a group rather than in a group, as was discussed in the seminar. So they need to discuss and to develop really good communication skills so that they could work well in a group. Anything else that you noted in that particular example?
Ange, I think it covered nearly everything. They had explicit instruction because the teacher would help them make plans, and you have the critical, we've talked about collaborative, even place-based, how they would build their structures to follow nature.
Definitely, Lauren, yeah, definitely. But I think there would have probably been that explicit instruction. It wasn't discussed, but I would imagine using all of those tools, there would need to be some, I do, we do, you do, just to make sure that in terms of safety as well, that the students were comfortable and confident in using all of those tools. Yeah, so some really good examples there, I thought, across all of the pedagogies that we looked at and more. Okay, so we're going to unpack assessment task 2 in a little bit more detail. So far, you've had the task sheet, you have had the example that Jen unpacked in week 7, and she went in detail through the 4R's tool for reflection. So that's available in the week 7 folder, and I've also noticed that it's available in the support resources for assessment task 2 as well. So it's in there with the Padlet for the frequently asked questions. So while we're on that, I cannot stress enough, I went in and had a look just before the session, and there are a lot more questions there now as well. So I would advise you to go and have a look regularly and post any questions there as well if you have any that you're wondering about. And those of you who are watching the recording at home, I would suggest that you do that too. So the first thing that I wanted to do is just see if you have any general questions about what the specific tasks involves. So the task sheet had the specific details, 3 500-word reflective journal entries, and remembering that there is plus or minus 10% on the word count there as well. And so those 3 reflections, they're going to come from the case studies presented in those weeks. So the first one was presented in week 8 in learners, week 10 in pedagogy, and then you're going to have the week 12 when we're unpacking curriculum. So Jen has suggested or strongly encouraged that you write each journal reflection immediately following the presentation of the case studies. That's really important, just so that you knock them off one by one, making sure that you don't have to go back and revisit. You may go back and revisit if you've thought of something else, obviously, especially if as you're doing more reflections, you may become more comfortable and confident in doing them, and you may want to go back and revisit the first one. but very important, you should be referring to the weekly readings in your reflection and referencing these as well. Did anyone have the opportunity to participate in the support workshops? I've had some emails from a few students saying that they were able to attend. There's also a few in the coming weeks as well. But unfortunately, it looks like they're not going to be recorded. So they're separate from education, the student success groups. So unfortunately, it's not up to us whether or not they're recorded. So there still are some coming next week. So if you do have that opportunity, I would suggest that you go and have a look at, just to support your academic writing. But of course, the student success group are always there. Even if you need some one-on-one assistance, you can contact them and they'll be very happy to support you. So any further questions there? Anything?
I have a question about what you've just noted about referencing the textbook into your reflections, because there's obviously the part where you have to connect to literature.
Sorry, I didn't hear that last
I'm
bit.
doing the part about so basically I was asking about the connection to literature in the reflection, and basically I'm using the concept of teacher power because I thought that was really interesting, and then there's John Hattie, he's the main kind of person. So do I go and research literature from him, or am I referencing literature from the textbook? Because I'm a bit confused what to use to support that.
So you would be using literature that you've sourced from the unit readings, from the actual textbook, but Hattie is referenced in the textbook as well. So you could use Hattie, but like I'm happy if you really wanted to go and do a little bit more further research. If you're looking for a high 7, if there's something that you really want to expand your knowledge on, by all means, go and have a look further. But remember that you are very limited with the number of words that you do have. And so in-text referencing is taken into consideration there as well, and your reference list. So that's something that you need to be mindful of. But also remembering you do have that plus or minus 10%. A good question though, Paris. Very good.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Angela, just a question on this week's. Are we using any of those videos that we just chatted about?
No, that's not part of the stimulus. So Jen has posted the case study for this week up around pedagogy. So it's specifically about the experiences of a pre-service teacher. So I'll get you to go and have a look at that, and we can unpack that with some questions further, whether it be via email or if you want to discuss that in the Zoom session. But I think this week I really want to focus on your understandings and knock off assessment task 1. But good question, Sue. So it's not in response to those clips that we watched last week. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Sue?
Yes, but there's a part B now.
Please. I love part Bs.
Where would I find that case study that you're talking about that Jen posted, just so I can find it?
Okay, so the case studies are all in the assessment folder. So the first 2, so she's introducing them week at a time. So as I said, the first one is week 8, that's sitting in the assessment folder, and also week 10, the pedagogy one. But it's also, I'm pretty sure, in the folder for this week, just the general folder as well. Has anyone else seen it there? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw it there too. Yep. So in 2 different places, but they will always be in the assessment folder as she puts them up. Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks.
A pleasure indeed. Okay. So this is the criteria sheet that I talked about last time. So this is important for any piece of assessment. So you've got your task sheet and also the marking criteria sheet, so the rubric. And as I've said previously, this is what your marker will grade you from. So can you make sure that you have a copy of this, because we're going to look at this closely in a moment when we unpack an example. But the criteria, as you can see, they're directly related to the 4 R's. So the 4R tool for reflection table that Jen broke down in the week 7 recording seminar. So you will be graded according to each of these criteria. So 20% for the first 3, 30% for reconstruction. So this is where there is a focus on future practice. So I don't know, depending on where you are with your word count, you may want to spend a little bit more, use a few more words there. But of course, if you're clear and concise, you may not need to do that. It's up to you. And then the final 10%, so that is around your writing, so referencing, punctuation, paragraphing, your word choice, your organisation of ideas. As you can see, the criteria are broken down clearly over each grade. High distinction a 7, distinction a 6, credit a 5, and so on. Any questions about the criteria sheet before we start unpacking the example? Okay, so on the slide, you can see this is the first part of the reflection. And then on the next slide, we have the second part. So we're going to break this first part down first up. So this is going to support you in giving and receiving feedback in your breakout groups in a little while. But first, what we're going to do before we give each other feedback, what I'm going to do is go through this worked example as a group. So we'll do this through going through the 5 criteria on the marking sheet. So in terms of your future teaching practice, using a worked example with students, it demonstrates the steps required to complete the task or to solve a problem. So basically, the we do. So through scaffolding, the learning like this and unpacking each criteria, worked examples can really support students' skill development. And it can also assist with memory as well. Importantly, they can then use worked examples during their independent practice, helping them to embed new knowledge. So the you do. So on the slide, the first paragraph, it's neatly organised into paragraphs, unlike the first example that was broken down, which was kind of spread throughout. As a marker, I think this would be a lot easier. It's very clear where each of the 4 R's are placed. So to start with, looking at the first criteria on your sheet. So if you could go to that, we'll look at the reporting and responding. Has everyone got that there in front of them? Yep, excellent. And for those of you at home as well, while watching the recording, if you could have that criteria sheet, if you want to pause and go and get it, because we're going to discuss it point by point. So the first small paragraph, that ascertains quite clearly what the specific targeted issue is related to. So it's really essential that this is narrow and specific. So basically decisions about pedagogical approaches, specifically providing feedback. So it also identifies the stimulus or inquiry and what it actually involved. So an observation during their placement. But of course, your stimulus for the first one is going to be from the week 7 unit content. And it's going to be from the perspective of a pre-service teacher. You may also like to reflect on your experiences as a student, if they're relevant as well. It's up to you. And of course, they're all going to be completely different depending on your own experiences and the specific issue that you have chosen. The paragraph, as you can see, is really concise and nicely worded, other than a small grammatical error with an A missing, which could have been avoided with better proofreading. So, but overall, it's very concise. The student has also, as we were talking about earlier, I think before we started the recording, the use of a question. So the student has included 2 questions which further clarified the focus and also demonstrates some insight. What do you think? How could this first paragraph be improved? What do you think of the questions that were posed? Any thoughts? They do seem a little bit clunky to me. I think they could be better worded. So, for example, something like, it raised the question, what is considered good and bad in the context of teacher feedback? It further questions the effectiveness of personalising feedback given to children. So just, you can see a small adjustment in the wording. It clarifies what the specific focus is. Can you see how it did that? Just clarifies it just a little bit, so just a tweak. And so it really is important that when you're writing, you may start with dot points, then unpack them, and then improve it over and over again, rereading it to make it better, so going back over it. So I'm thinking in this first criteria, a 6, possibly maybe a 15 out of 20. Because it is very concise. The only thing is, I think those high 5, a 6, yeah, because the questions could be tweaked just a little bit to make that focus a little bit clearer. What are your thoughts? So that would sit in the distinction, 84 to 75%. Yeah. Anyone disagree with that? Feel free to disagree. No? All right, so moving into the second paragraph, the relating to self, it really does make some excellent connections between the incident or focus and the student's personal experiences. I really like the way they've done that. So talking about their own beliefs and reaction to the incident as well. Also, they've got explicit links to their knowledge, so relating directly to the unit content, evidence that they've engaged in depth with the readings and workshops, and a clear inference is also being made to professional practice. Could have actually been a little bit more there, I think, about professional practice, just making stronger links. But when we move over to the next paragraph, you'll see that that sentence really does segue nicely into the third paragraph. So again, well worded, clear and concise. Any thoughts? So what level do you think they've met the criteria at? I want someone to share here. What level do you think they've met the criteria at? Come on, have a go.
I think she's done well, but I'm just conscious of the word sophisticated.
Right.
I've got to try and understand what sophisticated means as far as connections. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that mean, oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Does that mean how you were saying Like it was good, but to link it to the professional standards. Is that what you meant there?
No, well, the professional standards is more in the next
All
criteria
right. Yep.
in
Okay.
reasoning. But, you know, there was a question on the Padlet asking if it had to be in the reasoning section. Could they put it in a different section, for example, reconstructing? And I'm fine with that, wherever it sits with your particular focus. You know, it could sit quite nicely when you're talking about future teaching practice. If you want to link it to the standards there, that's fine. It's up to you. But, you know, as part of the criteria, you do need to link it to the standards. But sophisticated connection, it means that it's in depth. It means that they've really thought critically about it. And, you know, talking about their specific experiences and how they've actually reacted to it as well. I think that is good. But their I statements. So this section is about relating to self. So you wouldn't be bringing theory into this as she has done.
Well, I would think it's probably sitting in the high distinction then.
Okay. Yeah. High distinction. Yeah. As I said, I think there could have been a little bit more in terms of a clearer inference to professional practice. So maybe just unpacking that just a little bit more. Yeah. So maybe I would I think, you know, a 7, maybe a low 7, a 17 out of 20 possibly. Yeah, but again, very concise. And as you can see, you really need, every word needs to count.
Can I just ask, sorry, when you were saying, like, referring it back to like how it's going to impact you in your like future practice, do you mean like writing a sentence so at the bottom of the paragraph, how she says like it made her cringe because they were taught to avoid it. So would you mean like put an example of how you would use it differently, like obviously not saying good boy or good girl, but how you would use it within the room if they did something well? Like, you know how she wrote about how you want to praise the work or behavior, not the person. Is that what you mean? Like talk about how you're going to do it and like give an example?
Yeah. So it says very briefly though, I would say where she says, I believe this should be avoided in all educational settings as the feedback should be specific to the student's behaviour or work. I would like to see one more sentence there just about professional practice. So not necessarily a specific example because it says strong focus on how this impacts on you as a beginning teacher. So I guess she could have said, I believe this should be avoided in an educational setting as this feedback should be specific to the student's behaviour or work. As a beginning teacher, you know, possibly some sort of suggestion about what you would do, but just very, very briefly, just so that the marker can see that you are thinking about how it will impact on you. Yeah? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we might move on to the second one. We've lost Paris, unfortunately. She's having glitches with her internet, so she's going to watch the recording. So, hi, Paris. Okay, so this next one, as you can see, the first sentence identifies the subject of the paragraph, so the underlying issue. So I like the way they've guided the reader's understanding here. That's always really important when you're structuring. Started with the research up front, citing seminal research, which could have been from the unit readings, or possibly they may have done a little bit of extra research, but that's not, you know, not completely necessary. They've included a direct quote or a phrase, so they've feedback about the person level. So just remember that in terms of APA, if you do use a direct quote and you've used quotation marks, you need to have a page number for that. But, you know, this is 500 words, and it's a personal reflection, I would actually be avoiding direct quotes. So you would need to paraphrase if you are referring to research. They've also referenced using et al. So I'm assuming that there would be 3 or more authors. What else? Again, some good insights and some critical reflection. They've actually compared and contrast 2 independent studies here, so that's good. It further, the phrase being reflected on fits in the feedback. They discussed that this level is not an effective approach to feedback. In agreement with such statements, theorists also discussed that personalised feedback causes students to focus on themselves instead of their work. So she's actually, compared 2 different theorists there, which I think is pretty good. A good final sentence in the paragraph summarising with reference to multiple research that they've sourced. Yep. Again, I'm assuming that is from the unit, from the book chapter, possibly, or possibly some further research correctly referenced as well. So looking at that and looking at the specific criteria, the reasoning, which is worth 20%, what's missing? Read the criteria.
She hasn't referred to any of the APSTs. I don't
No, yeah, she hasn't. So she hasn't done that throughout. So that's definitely missing, which is unfortunate because she would have got quite a high grade for this particular one. Anyone want to take a guess at which standard it might be? Oh, Lauren's got them up on a notice board, haven't you, Lauren?
I do.
Go girl. Go girl.
Standard 5.
Yeah, 5 points.
2.
Excellent.
Is it?
Yeah, provide feedback to students on their learning. Yeah, so unpacking or just making a link to that again very briefly. So even though they have sourced some relevant research and have clearly engaged with the unit material, they haven't really drawn upon the standards, which is clearly outlined in the criteria. So whether you do it in this section or in the next section, you really would need to have that. But again, I would say a 6, maybe 16 out of 20, because it is a good paragraph and they really have made those links to theory. What are your thoughts?
Ange, over time, is it just quite natural to reflect this way rather than having like that to check notes here and there and go, oh, have I covered that? Have I covered this? Does it just come naturally?
Well, when you're going into your professional experience, into your placement, you're going to be doing these kind of reflections regularly. So not necessarily this big, depending on what you're doing, or you may have to do this in a particular unit, but it's definitely something that you would be doing, and you would be reflecting using links to the Australian professional standards and also links to theory as well. So yes, Lauren, this is something that you would be doing on a regular basis over the next 4 years. So this is a really important skill, and that's why Jen's really focusing on this. So you're doing 3 of them. Good question, Lauren. Did I answer it?
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I would say a 16 out of 20. So the final paragraph, reconstructing. So this one is the one that's 30% of the total grade. So they've made some specific links to future teaching practice with conclusions supported by the literature. The theorists discussed, possibly put an in-text reference there, like Hattie and Timpley 2007 discussed above, or discussed or all believe in the importance of feedback, maybe something a little bit more critical than that. Making sure that your sentences aren't empty. Every word counts, making sure that they're critical, that they actually say something. The theorists discussed above all believe in the importance of feedback. That doesn't really tell us much, does it? So it needs to be unpacked a little bit more to make it more in depth, more critical. So some specific pedagogical strategies or approaches might have been a good addition. So possibly in terms of feedback, maybe something around feedback needing to be related to clear criteria or learning goals. And it also seems to have concluded a little bit abruptly too. Yeah, so a bit of a concluding sentence as well may have been good here. So a bit more depth needed in this last paragraph, I think. And when I say more depth, I don't necessarily mean more words. I just mean that the words are used more effectively. So the total word count, I think I counted it up and it was about 480. So he or she definitely had words to play with here. So I would be expecting you to reach the 500 words, maybe going over a little bit with that 10%. And also remembering that you've got your reference list as well. But the reference list isn't going to be substantial in this one. So I'd say maybe a 5, yeah, for this particular criteria. Not really over that. It does need to have more depth. Any thoughts, any questions? No?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have a question. Just in the rubric, it talks about referencing.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when we do an assignment, referencing happens at the end. Are we
Yep.
supposed to include the reference at the end of the reflection? Is that what they're saying?
Do you mean your reference list?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So you would have to include your references at the end.
So not the end of the assignment, but at the end of the reflection?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would assume, does it say that on the criteria, on the task sheet? I would assume that it would be at the end, Sue. Yeah.
Okay.
I would assume that you would just chunk them all at the end.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But, Sue, I'm going to leave it up to you to post that question on the Padlet. It's your homework.
Okay.
Post the question on the Padlet just to make sure that I am correct. But I would say references at the end rather of the actual assessment rather than at the end of each reflection. Don't know if it would make a huge amount of difference either way, but post it on the Padlet just so that we can get clarification.
Okay.
Good question. The final one, written expression, writing conventions and referencing. So criteria 5, what do we think? Overall, writing is at a really good level. I think the organisation is great, use of good paragraphing, nicely structured paragraphs, including good opening subject sentences that guide the reader's understanding. Flows very nicely, as you saw, easy to identify where each of the R's sit through the use of those subject sentences. Grammar is pretty good, some minor APA errors there. But generally, yeah, pretty good. I would say maybe an 8 out of 10. So I think the assessment piece, is probably sitting on a 6 overall. As you can see, they fell down in that reconstructing section. And again, that was worth 30% as well. So any questions at all so far? Was that a helpful exercise? Yeah, good. Excellent. All right. So again, I can't emphasize the importance of making that focus really specific. As you can see, you would need to keep reinstating that focus all the way through, making sure that you made it very clear and it was unpacked in that last section in terms of the future teaching practice. Yeah, they really needed to unpack that more in that last section as well. So I will try to focus on the other 3 levels of the feedback as discussed. Feedback about the task, feedback about the processing of the task, and feedback about self-regulation, as they seem to be more appropriate and effective. It just feels like it needs one final sentence, maybe about professional practice, maybe about a specific approach or something like that, to support that. Just unpacking in a little bit more depth. Okay. So we're going to move on to giving each other some feedback now. So you're going to have the opportunity, those of you who are here, to share what you've done so far and give and receive some constructive feedback. So we're going to use what we call the tag feedback form. So we ask you to download this or take a screenshot of it. It's one that's commonly used in schools. So you may come across it when you're going on professional experience, but I really want you to, in the process of giving and receiving feedback, knowing that this is something that your students are going to be doing in the future, I really want you to think about how you feel about receiving feedback. You know, what sort of emotions are you feeling? Because it can be a little bit off-putting. You know, you're concerned about, oh, what are they going to say? Are they going to judge me? And also it's about giving feedback as well, because you don't want to, embarrass someone or upset them in any way. So there is quite a bit of fear and uncertainty around feedback, and that's something that you're going to unpack in future units as well, about how to give and receive feedback as a teacher to student, for student to student, but also teacher to teacher as well. So you're going to be giving your colleagues a lot of feedback and receiving feedback from them in your practice as well. So it's something that you will need to learn how to do and develop those skills. So on the form, you can see the tasks. So that relates directly to the 4 R's that Jen unpacked. And then we've got the specific criteria, just I put for the high distinction area there, but you may want to refer to the whole of the rubric as well when you're discussing. So tell them something that you like, ask them a question about their work, and give them a suggestion for improvement. So I'm going to give you a moment to have a look at the slide. In your pairs, I'm going to give you about, I think I'll give you 15 minutes. You can come back if you finish a bit earlier, but you will need to, if you have a Word copy of your reflection, so the first 2 R's, I would like you to share that via your screen in the breakout room, so you can take turns doing that. So we're just concentrating on the first 2 R's. You may want to even, if you want to do it in depth, you can share the feedback form with each other via email, or you can share it, just use the questions as prompts and you can verbally provide feedback. It's up to you. You can discuss it together. And then when you come back, we're going to unpack the final 2 R's in a bit of depth, and you can ask me questions about that. Any questions at this point before I put you into breakout groups? I'm going to pause the recording here. Okay, so we have finished our breakout rooms, and the general consensus is that everyone needs to be more concise. So just making sure that, you know, you go over and over your sentences, making sure that they mean something, so that there is some depth to them, that they're not wasted words. All right, so we're going to move on now. We've nearly finished, but we're going to have a look at the reasoning and reconstructing the final 2 R's. So as we saw in the worked example, there were very clear links to the unit material in the reasoning section. So this is important. So it shows that you've engaged with the unit material. So the student had also drawn out some other scholarly research to support conclusions. So that's not completely necessary. That's up to you. But as I said before, you need to be conscious of your word limit. Again, if you find that you're having difficulty in this section, in the reasoning and reconstruction level, it may be because your focus isn't narrow enough. It might be too broad, and there might be too much literature and too many possibilities for the final where you need to talk about future practice. So we've talked quite about that this evening. So very important that it's narrow. Another thing that's important is to make sure that in this first case study that you do have links back to diversity, because that was the focus of week 7. So you need to bring it back to diversity in some way. So the reconstruction level, it needs to relate to future practice. So looking at the specific wording, it says that you need to link your learning from the reflection to professional practice. So it's all about, from this, I have learned that. So you would be specifically talking about what you've learned and then how you're going to take that into professional practice. So in the reconstruction, it actually has some questions. What have I learned about myself and about education, schools, teaching, and or young people? How will this situation or issue affect my future learning and the way I will teach? So it's very specific there for you to guide you in that particular section. So in our worked example, this was really where the student could have improved to achieve a higher grade. So more depth was definitely needed there. Any questions from those of you here about that reasoning and reconstruction section?
Ange, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So with how do we connect the key learning to the textbook?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've picked a stimulus from the textbook. So, which I don't mind saying it's about tokenism from the textbook. So yeah. Should I look at more research or just from what the textbook covers?
It would depend, I can't remember what it says about tokenism, Laura, but I would say if it doesn't say enough or you can't find enough, I would look elsewhere as well, just to make sure that your conclusions are supported by theory, that you reference all ideas that aren't your own. That's really important. So in text and also in your reference list. So was there a specific, did it refer to research in that section?
Yeah, I've got, so it was about, where are we? It was about inclusion and covert discrimination.
Okay. So that was a particular something that you read, a stimulus that really made you think about it. You possibly thought about your previous experiences and related to that. Okay.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would look a little bit further, Lauren, maybe at a couple of articles on QUT database, something fairly recent if you can find it, or possibly something seminal. So by seminal, of course, I mean that it's respected research, even if it's older, like Bronfenbrenner or Vygotsky or something like that, that it's, even though it is more than 4 years or 5 years ago, it's actually been, it's important research. Good question.
Okay,
Anyone
okay.
else? Not at this point. Okay, as I said, and for those of you at home, if you do think of anything, email your tutor. So finally, last thing that I want to do is just to recap about what pedagogies were evident in this learning forum. So what approaches to teaching can we recognise in some of the experiences that we did? Let's have a look at the worked example first.
Collaborative.
Collaborative, definitely, yeah. So student-directed collaborative learning, working in groups of 2 or groups of 3, giving and receiving feedback using that tag method, so definitely collaborative. What about when we broke down the worked example?
Would that come under explicit?
Yeah, so I do, we do, you do. Yeah, definitely. Good, yeah. And what about using the examples of the clips, the pedagogy clips, when we unpacked that?
That the pedagogical content knowledge, because they were
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah, good. So analysing learning content and unpacking examples in practice. So good, yeah. Excellent. So any further questions before we finish up? No. So as you're going with your the final 2 4Rs, so reasoning and reconstructing, make sure you really do concentrate on being concise, making sure that every word counts, that you go in depth, and that you do relate it to theory, and very importantly, unlike the example that we saw, that you do relate it to the Australian professional standards, and you would also include that in your reference list as well. Okay, I am going to stop the recording. Good night to everyone at home. Shall see you later.